What if I told you that at 65 years old, when most people are collecting Social Security, one man was sleeping in his car with nothing but a pressure cooker and a secret recipe? That man was Harland Sanders, and he was about to build the most recognizable restaurant empire in the world. Born in 1890 on a small Indiana farm, Harland David Sanders faced tragedy early. When his father died, and he was just 5 years old, young Harland had to help raise his siblings while his mother worked. By age 10, he was cooking for the family. By 12, he had left home. What followed was a lifetime of struggles and failures. Sanders tried everything. He was a farmhand, a streetcar conductor, an insurance salesman, a railroad fireman, even a lawyer who lost his practice after a courtroom brawl. Each failure was teaching him something, though he didn't know it yet. By 1930, Sanders found himself running a small service station in Corbin, Kentucky. He started serving meals to travelers from his own dining table. His fried chicken, made with a secret blend of 11 herbs and spices, became the talk of the town. But Sanders was 40 years old and still struggling to make ends meet. But then something remarkable happened that would change Sanders' life forever. In 1935, Kentucky Governor Ruby Laffoon decided to honor Sanders for his contributions to the state's reputation for hospitality and good food. At a formal ceremony in Frankfort, Sanders was commissioned as an honorary Kentucky colonel, a title that carried real prestige and respect throughout the South. Sanders took this honor more seriously than anyone expected. He immediately began dressing the part, trading his simple work clothes for a crisp white suit, black string tie, and the goatee that would become his trademark. This wasn't just about appearance. Sanders understood that he was now representing something bigger than himself. He was becoming the living symbol of Southern hospitality and culinary excellence. The transformation was remarkable. Customers didn't just come for the chicken anymore. They came to meet the colonel. Sanders would greet every guest personally, ask about their travels, and make sure their experience was perfect. He understood something that most restaurant owners missed. People don't just buy food, they buy memories. And he was determined to give every customer a story they'd remember for the rest of their lives. By 1940, Sanders' Court Restaurant was featured in Duncan Hines' famous guidebook, Adventures in Good Eating, the most influential restaurant guide in America. This was the seal of approval that serious food lovers trusted, and it meant that people would drive hundreds of miles just to taste the Colonel's chicken. Sanders had built something special, and for the first time in 50 years, he felt like success might actually last. But Sanders had learned not to get too comfortable with success. At age 62, when most men would be thinking about retirement, he was about to face the biggest challenge of his life, one that would either destroy everything he'd built or transform him into one of America's greatest entrepreneurs. In 1956, the unthinkable happened. The new Interstate 75 was completed, and it bypassed Corbin entirely. Overnight, the steady stream of travelers who had kept Sanders' Court profitable for 20 years simply disappeared. The highway that had brought Sanders his success was now carrying his customers past his restaurant at 70 miles per hour without even a glance in his direction. At 66 years old, Sanders watched his life's work crumble. The restaurant that had made him famous was now virtually empty. His savings were disappearing as quickly as his customers had. Most men his age would have accepted this as a sign that it was time to retire, collect Social Security, and admit that their best days were behind them. But Harland Sanders wasn't most men. Instead of giving up, Sanders did something that seemed completely insane to everyone who knew him. He decided to take his chicken recipe on the road and try to convince other restaurant owners to serve his food. His plan was simple but revolutionary. He would teach restaurants his cooking method and secret recipe, and they would pay him a nickel for every piece of chicken they sold using his system. This was the birth of franchising as we know it today, though Sanders didn't know he was creating a business model that would transform American commerce. All he knew was that he had something valuable, a recipe that people loved, and a cooking method that was faster and better than anything else available. If he couldn't bring customers to his restaurant, he would bring his restaurant to the customers. Sanders loaded his 1946 Ford with everything he owned: his pressure cooker, samples of his spice blend, and copies of his secret recipe written in his own hand. At an age when most people are settling into retirement, Harland Sanders was about to embark on the most important journey of his life. He had no idea that he was about to prove that in America, it's never too late to build an empire. What followed was one of the most remarkable displays of persistence in American business history. Sanders began driving from town to town, walking into restaurants with his pressure cooker under one arm and his spice samples in the other. His pitch was simple but audacious. Let me cook my chicken for you. If you don't think it's the best you've ever tasted, I'll pay for all the ingredients. The rejections were brutal and immediate. Restaurant owners looked at this elderly man in a white suit and thought he was either a salesman or completely crazy. "We already know how to cook chicken," they would say. "We don't need some old man's recipe." Many wouldn't even let him demonstrate his cooking method, dismissing him before he could even explain what made his chicken different. Sanders slept in his car to save money, ate from cans to stretch his budget, and drove on bald tires that he couldn't afford to replace. He was living on Social Security checks that barely covered his gasoline, let alone food or lodging. Most nights, he would park behind a restaurant or in a rest area, curl up in the back seat of his Ford, and wonder if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. But Sanders had learned something during his decades of failure. Rejection wasn't personal, and it wasn't permanent. Every no was simply practice for the yes that would change everything. He kept detailed notes of every restaurant he visited, every objection he heard, and every reason he was turned away. He was learning to refine his pitch, improve his presentation, and better understand what restaurant owners really wanted. The breakthrough came in Salt Lake City, Utah. Pete Harman owned a small restaurant that was struggling to compete with the larger establishments. When Sanders walked through his door, Harman was desperate enough to listen to anyone with a new idea. After Sanders prepared his pressure-cooked chicken with the secret blend of 11 herbs and spices, Harman took one bite and immediately knew he had something special. Within weeks of adding Sanders' chicken to his menu, Harman's restaurant sales doubled. Word spread quickly through the local restaurant community. This old Colonel's chicken recipe was the real deal. Harman became Sanders' first official franchisee, and their partnership would prove that sometimes the most unlikely combinations create the greatest success stories. The success at Pete Harman's restaurant changed everything. Word spread through the restaurant industry faster than Sanders could have imagined. If Pete Harman could double his sales with this old Colonel's chicken recipe, maybe there was something to it after all. Restaurant owners who had previously dismissed Sanders began calling him, asking if he was still available to set up his system in their establishments. But Sanders quickly realized that success brought new challenges he hadn't anticipated. Each restaurant needed training on his precise cooking methods, quality control to ensure consistency, and ongoing support to maintain standards. Sanders couldn't be in every restaurant at once, so he developed detailed training manuals, standardized procedures, and strict quality requirements that every franchisee had to follow. The demand grew so rapidly that Sanders had to systematize everything. He created official KFC training programs, developed supplier relationships for consistent ingredients, and established quality inspection procedures. By 1963, just 7 years after sleeping in his car, Sanders had over 600 franchised restaurants across the United States and Canada. The man who couldn't afford new tires was now worth millions of dollars. But Sanders faced a dilemma that would define his legacy. At 74 years old, he was traveling over 250,000 miles per year, personally inspecting restaurants, training new franchisees, and ensuring quality control. The physical demands were enormous, and Sanders realized he needed to make a decision about the future of his company. In 1964, Sanders made a choice that shocked the business world. He sold the KFC Corporation to a group of investors for $2 million. Many people thought he was crazy to sell such a successful company, but Sanders had a different vision. He retained the rights to his image, his title as Colonel, and continued to receive royalties from every franchise. More importantly, he negotiated a lifetime contract as the company's goodwill ambassador and quality control spokesperson. The sale allowed KFC to expand globally in ways that Sanders never could have managed alone. Under new ownership, the company went public, opened international locations, and became one of the world's most recognizable brands. Sanders continued to travel, inspect restaurants, and appear in advertising campaigns that made his face and voice known to millions of people worldwide. Even in his 80s, Sanders remained obsessed with quality. He would show up unannounced at KFC locations, taste the chicken, and publicly criticize any restaurant that didn't meet his standards. He once famously called KFC's gravy wallpaper paste and their chicken a damn fried dough ball stuck on some chicken. Sanders understood that his name and reputation were on every bucket, and he refused to compromise on the standards that had built his empire. Sanders used his wealth and fame to help others achieve their dreams. He mentored young entrepreneurs, funded scholarships for culinary students, and supported small businesses throughout Kentucky. He understood that success carried responsibility, and he took that responsibility seriously. The man who had struggled through poverty for most of his life never forgot what it felt like to have nothing. Even in his late 80s, Sanders maintained a schedule that would exhaust men half his age. He continued making public appearances, visiting KFC locations, and ensuring that quality standards met his expectations. When asked why he didn't retire completely, Sanders would say, "I'm too young to quit and too old to start over, so I might as well keep going." Sanders' work ethic became legendary throughout the business world. He proved that age was no barrier to achievement, that failure was just preparation for success, and that quality and persistence could overcome any obstacle. His story inspired a generation of entrepreneurs who had been told they were too old, too poor, or too late to start their own businesses. On December 16, 1980, at the age of 90, Harlan David Sanders passed away at Jewish Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. His funeral was attended by over 1,000 people, including governors, business leaders, and thousands of ordinary customers whose lives had been touched by his story. The flag at the Kentucky State Capitol was flown at half-staff, and KFC restaurants around the world observed a moment of silence. Today, more than 4 decades after Colonel Sanders' death, his legacy continues to grow stronger every year. KFC has become one of the world's most recognizable brands, serving over 12 million customers daily across 6 continents. The company generates billions in revenue annually, employs hundreds of thousands of people, and has made chicken one of the world's most popular foods. But Sanders' true legacy isn't measured in restaurants or revenue. It's measured in the millions of people who have been inspired by his story. His life proves that the American dream has no expiration date, no age limit, and no respect for what society considers impossible. Every day, entrepreneurs around the world look at their own failures and remember that Colonel Sanders didn't start building his empire until he was 65 years old. The secret recipe of 11 herbs and spices remains locked in a vault at KFC headquarters in Louisville, Kentucky. Only a handful of people in the world know the complete formula, and it's protected by security measures that would impress any intelligence agency. This recipe, created by a man sleeping in his car with 87 cents to his name, is now worth billions of dollars and represents one of the most valuable trade secrets in business history. Sanders' image continues to evolve and reach new generations. His likeness appears on everything from phone apps to video games, and his story is taught in business schools around the world as a masterclass in perseverance, quality control, and brand building. The Colonel has become more than just a businessman. He's become a symbol of American determination and the power of never giving up. Modern entrepreneurs facing their own challenges often ask themselves, what would Colonel Sanders do? The answer is always the same. Keep going, maintain quality, treat people right, and remember that it's never too late to build something great. His recipe for success was simpler than his chicken seasoning: work hard, never compromise on quality, and refuse to accept defeat. As we conclude the remarkable story of Colonel Harland Sanders, there are lessons here that transcend business, transcend age, and transcend any excuse we might make for not pursuing our dreams. Sanders' life teaches us that failure is not the opposite of success. It's the raw material from which success is built. Every rejection Sanders faced, every business that failed, every setback that seemed to end his hopes was actually preparing him for the moment when he would build something that lasted. His decades of struggle weren't wasted years. They were education, training, and character development that would make his eventual success not just possible, but inevitable. If you're watching this video and you're 25, remember that Sanders didn't find real success until he was 65. You have time. If you're 45 and feeling like opportunities are passing you by, remember that Sanders was still failing at 45. Your time may still be coming. If you're 65 and thinking it's too late to start something new, Remember that Sanders was sleeping in his car at 65 and built a global empire before he died. The secret ingredient in Colonel Sanders' recipe for success wasn't one of those 11 herbs and spices, it was persistence. It was the refusal to accept that failure meant the end of the story. It was the understanding that every no was just practice for the yes that would change everything. Sanders proved that in America, it doesn't matter where you start. It matters where you decide to go. It doesn't matter how old you are. It matters how determined you are. It doesn't matter how many times you've failed. It matters how many times you're willing to try again. The next time you face rejection, remember Colonel Sanders sleeping in his Ford. The next time you think you're too old to chase your dreams, remember the 65-year-old man with a pressure cooker and a crazy idea. The next time you want to give up, remember that somewhere out there is your Pete Harman, the person who will say yes and change your life forever. Colonel Sanders didn't just build a restaurant empire, he built proof that the American dream is alive and well for anyone brave enough to chase it. His legacy lives on in every entrepreneur who refuses to quit, every dreamer who ignores the critics, and every person who believes that it's never too late to start something great.